need to take furious notes. You don't need to take furious notes because the session is being recorded. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I work, and I work a little bit differently than other people who are in this college transition space. I actually work backwards, which does seem a little bit strange. It makes sense, of course, when you think about the transition from high school to college, that you would talk chronologically about what you need in high school and then how to prepare for college. But in fact, being a sociologist, all of my work is backed up by data and research in the field. And so what I actually do is I start with the research that focuses on where first-year students fail to thrive at college, not where they fail, but where they fail to thrive. And then I work backwards. I go back to the high school and to those students who have recently graduated and their parents, and I start talking about building some of those skills that seem to be lacking on college campuses. So let's talk a little more about that. What aspects of college were students least prepared for? And this is American college, not American university, United States universities. This is an overview of 25,000 sophomores, asking them, what were you last year least prepared for? And 30% of them said that they felt that they were academically least prepared. Financially and socially came in next, and then the life balance was next. I think it's really important to note, because many of us, I'm a parent as well, see academics and we think, but this doesn't make sense. My kids seemed totally ready for college. That 30%, those 30% of the sophomores that we're talking about academic preparation, they actually were not talking about content level preparation. If your student has been accepted to American University, they are definitely ready for the academics. The admissions office has deemed it so. But where we're talking about here really comes down to things like time management skills, executive functioning skills, etc. So I'm going to focus on some of that tonight. But when you hear academics and you hear that students are least prepared for academics, do keep in mind we're not talking about content area. We're talking about those study skills. So let's talk a little bit about myths of new college parents. So the first myth that I see is that college parents believe that college-ready kids must excel both academically and socially. And I would say it is the rare college freshman who is 100% ready to thrive as well as a college senior academically and socially. And please keep in mind that all universities, and especially American University, which is my second home, I know and love it very well, they're prepared for messy 18-year-olds. They are really prepared for students who are in some ways lacking some either academic skills or some social skills. So your kid does not have to be 100% ready to be ready for college. Another thing we hear in this space is another myth of new college parents is that no one will get my kid like I do. And I do work a lot with high school parents, and they tell me this fear. And I say to them what I'm going to say to you, which is absolutely, you know your child better than anybody on a college campus ever will. But we have something you don't have, which is we have trend studies behind us. So I can tell you that in the 25 years I worked at American University, mostly with first and second year students, I probably worked with, I think I calculated 33,000 students. So even though I might not know your student as well as you do, I have those ideas of the 18-year-old brain, as do many faculty and staff at American University. So even if they don't know your child, they certainly know freshmen. Teens don't want to learn from their parents is another myth of new college parents. I would say many teens think they know everything and they don't necessarily need to learn anything. But in fact, studies really show that when we sit down and have some conversations, and some of those conversations are in my Talking College card deck, you realize that some of those incoming students are really excited to hear about their family's journey. And it doesn't matter if their parents went to college or not, they want to hear about what it was like to leave home as a young adult. And so I do think it's important to dive into some of those conversations before your student heads off. And we're going to give you some tips tonight. The college process ends with acceptances. That's another myth. There is a misconception, I think, that in the way the Harry Potter letter is delivered by Owl, and that parents sometimes think that once my student gets their college acceptance letter, miraculously, in that magical letter are those adulting skills needed for college. But in fact, that's not necessarily the case. In the admissions letter, it doesn't come with those adulting skills. And so really it's a time now, the remainder of time that you have before your child leaves home, to really start thinking about some of those skills your student might be lacking or weaker in, and start building some of those skills. Other kids have it all together is another myth of new college parents. We've got 140 something people registered for this webinar tonight. So I promise you that there are other families who feel the same way, that they really want to learn some of these skills. So to 5 major points that I'm going to cover tonight. The first one is defining the differences between the role of a high school parent and the role of a college parent. The second is the idea of encouraging and normalizing mistakes and challenges, and not kind of avoiding those mistakes and challenges, but knowing that your kid will absolutely make mistakes and challenges. That's a normal part of learning to transition to college. And in fact, the way to handle it is to sort of plan ahead in some of those what would you do scenarios with your student about how they will handle those mistakes and challenges as they come. The third thing I'm going to talk about is how you can work early on some of those teachable and important life skills, and there's still time before your student heads off. The next is with your student, not in lieu of your student, but with your student, explore ways to be connected on the AU campus and really help them prepare for the differences between high school and college. And I'll bring some of those into our conversation tonight. And finally, shifting language to the student as the problem-solving lead. And in fact, it's important to do that in order to discuss things like college scenarios, wellness, and upcoming big decisions that they will be making. So let's dive into the first one, defining roles for high school and college and all of those parts. So the college does a great job, American University and many other campuses do a great job of kind of telling you what their role is in your family and what their role is for your student. Also, AU and many other schools do a great job of telling you the roles for college students. The language is very inclusive, talks about being a leader. You can find it in the school's mission. It's many of the web pages at AU. We're honing leadership skills, young adults of tomorrow, members of a community. Those are sort of the buzzwords, and they're heartfelt for the roles of college students on a college campus. But the role of college parents, although AU's Parent and Family Engagement Office does a wonderful job with their educational arm, it's really, really challenging for some parents because there's no handbook on the differences between being a high school parent and being a college parent. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and knowing that those rule books don't exist, we're going to talk about some tips to kind of get you there. So here is a chart. And here what I'd love to do is just talk to you very briefly about some of these. Now, keep in mind, there is no single story here. So your family might be a little different or your child might be a little different, but these are pretty standard roles of the high school parent. Many high school parents organize lives for their children. And that needs to shift when the parent becomes a college parent. And instead of being the organizer, not only because it's not an appropriate role for you anymore, but also you won't know the day-to-day life of your child, we now need to shift to a college parent role where we are supportive. And supporting doesn't mean that our child is going from dependent to independent overnight. In fact, what it means is that we need to support our students so they can find those resources to help them on campus. High school parents often fix mistakes. We as parents are really, really good fixers. We've been doing it since our kids were little. But college parents no longer can fix mistakes. And in fact, due to federal law, we are not allowed to be the fixer of mistakes. And we need to kind of help our children hone those skills so they, as young adults, can fix their own mistakes. High school parents often, not always, but often remove obstacles. You may have heard we moved from the role of the helicopter parent to the role of the snowplow parent in our society, meaning that we are actually forging a plowed path for our children, removing all obstacles. And that's a challenge because in college, our parents really need to step aside for the student to traverse those obstacles. And many of those reasons exist in that fact that we don't necessarily know what's going on in the day-to-day life of our kids. If you, like me, have ever heard yourself say, while you're living under my roof, what happens when our child is no longer under our roof? And even though it might be temporary, of course, they're always our children and they will come home at some point. That's a really powerful statement to think, what does that actually mean? High school parents often provide daily reminders and reiterate expectations. And so if you are a parent who reminded your child, did you remember to study for your chemistry test, or do you have your soccer uniform, or did you take your lunch? We are no longer going to be doing that as college parents. College parents rarely provide reminders. And really, it's time for us, instead of reiterating expectations again and again, I feel like a broken record. It's because we are saying the same things in high school again and again. College is a time for us to encourage students to set their own expectations. So this is a chart with a lot of heavy information. And of course, every family is different, but I encourage you to go back to the chart and kind of think, are there ways that maybe you can grow as a parent in this process? I could do an entire webinar on FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It's definitely something to familiarize yourself with. I know AU is wonderful about communicating all about FERPA and if there's going to be a waiver signed. But keep in mind that unless your college student does sign a waiver, FERPA, which is a federal law, prohibits the college from providing parents with a lot of information, including the student's disability accommodations, their grades, their academic progress, academic probation, etc. So if you're not familiar with FERPA, this is a time to get familiar with FERPA and actually have a really important conversation with your family if you are going to ask your student or require of your student to sign a FERPA waiver. I also want to talk a little bit about the concept of overparenting. I'm not a fan of that term. It really bothers me, both as an educator and as a parent. I like to talk about when high school parents maybe do a little too much for their kids, kind of coming down to loving support versus detrimental enabling. So I don't believe there is any such thing as overparenting. I think we parent out of love. We want to do the best for our children. I hear a lot from the high school families I work with. I know my student can do this thing, but I do it for them because they're so busy. And of course, we know that our children are so busy, and certainly we're busy in their high school lives. But it's an important thing to think about. Is my loving support actually enabling my child to move forward? So a question we all need to ask ourselves. And I love the fact that perspective taking is such an important and critical really important and critical theme of this time. And it's also crucial in order to prepare our kids for the transition to college. So let me tell you a little bit about perspective taking. I'm going to give you my favorite example of perspective taking. So college move-in day is my absolute favorite example of taking different perspectives. So if you sit down with some new college parents, you hear this language. Today is the last day we can spend together as a complete family. And we're going to take a photo of our kid in their room before they set the room up. And then after they set their room up, and we're going to take a picture of our child with Claude the Eagle. And we're going to take a picture with the American University sign. And we've got grandma here and we've got little siblings here. And this is such a special day because it's the last day that we can spend as a complete family. And that is a parent's perspective. It is not right or wrong. It is a parent's perspective. However, here's the new student's perspective. Today is not the last day of anything. It's actually the first day of my college life. And my goal today is to get myself set up, say goodbye to my family, and start to meet new people and have some new experiences. So again, I'm not saying that one is right and one is wrong, but I do think the multiple perspectives are really important to understand. And in many different avenues, and this is just one example from move-in day. So as parents, my best advice would be to look through your situation, through your own lens, and then also try on the glasses of your child as well and look through the same experience through their lens. Number 2, encouraging and normalizing challenges and mistakes and discussing how your child will handle them in college. So here are the most common first-year college student challenges we see across the country. Time management is the big one. Roommate disagreements is another one that's really high on the list. Getting homesick is up there too. And sometimes I say this to parents and they think, oh, my child's going to miss me so much. And yes, they might, but that's actually not the homesickness I'm talking about. When we sit down with students and we ask them questions, and this comes from a lot of the residence life and residential education literature, they say they're homesick for their pets, their siblings, and the ease of everything, meaning it's lovely when you're at home to be able to open the refrigerator and amazingly there's food there for you to eat. You open your cabinet and there's food there for you to eat. And so this is something that's really interesting to dig in with 18 and 19-year-olds when we ask what homesickness is like. We're homesick for the ease of home. So that's something to think about. It is also common for first-year students to struggle with their health. That could be a physical health or mental health. Beyond COVID, it can certainly be just the common cold that a student has maybe in the past had a family member who has kind of been the one to take care of them. And what do you do when you're sick on your own? Course selection is another one that really rears its ugly head. And for a lot of college students, I think that there is a myth that once you show up at college, you're going to be able to take, advanced astrophysics right away, and all of these exciting classes. And those exciting classes do exist at AU, but not all of them are available in the first year of college. And that's something to keep in mind. There are a number of core classes that students have to get through at AU and at many other schools. And so students might feel a little frustrated in the beginning with their course selection. And then not being accepted into a group of choice. That could be anything from an a cappella group to a team, to a club sport, to Greek life. Maybe they were the best singer in their high school, but now they're going to be competing with the best singers of many high schools. And so sometimes that's a little bit challenging for first-year students. Common first-year student mistakes: losing or breaking something important. Not a question. There is going to be something broken or lost in the first year of college, and the earlier we learn this as parents, I think the better. Hopefully, it's nothing as big as a laptop, but again, having those conversations in advance with your child. What would you do if you lost your student ID? What's going to happen if your phone disappears, or if your winter coat you can't find it? What are you actually going to do? And ideally, not texting mom immediately, but trying to work through those mistakes and those challenges on their own. The second one, which is a huge one, is not using campus resources. And many colleges have wonderful campus resources. I can speak at length about AU's wonderful campus resources, but those campus resources are only useful if the student actually crosses the threshold and goes into the writing center or the counseling center. So not using those campus resources is a really important mistake that students make their freshman year. Making a poor financial decision can be something very small. It's usually running out of meal swipes, or not budgeting their money wisely. Hopefully it's not a very large financial decision, but talking about money and finances before your student leaves for college is very, very important. Not asking for academic help is another one along the lines of not using campus resources. Actually, trend studies show that the majority of college students don't start going to office hours with their professors and TAs regularly until their sophomore spring. And that is problematic because the earlier our students can get in to see their professors and to see their TAs, the better they'll actually do in class. So encouraging your students to really take advantage of those office hours. At AU, professors are required to have office hours, 2 hours of office hours for every class they teach. So they can easily be able to find those professors and meet with them. Getting over or under involved is another issue. A lot of students have trouble getting off that rat race of high school, not really knowing how many clubs and organizations they should join. And that's a tough balance. My advice, and again, it doesn't work for every student, but my advice is always to start with three of something, something that you do for yourself, for a passion area, or excitement or fun, something that you do for others. That might be volunteering your time, that might be government time, it might be doing something through spiritual and campus life, and then something for your career or your major. So that might be joining a business fraternity or going to an economics club meeting. And then making a poor social decision is a big one for all college students and certainly for first-year students. So I love to say it's really important to begin early to work on some of these teachable life skills that your student's going to need, not just for this coming year, but for college and beyond college. So here are just some basic ones. And this is just a short list of many. Your students should know how to do laundry, ironing, basic sewing. And I hear from a lot, ironing, why would my kid need to iron? There are lots of students that have jobs and need to actually have an iron shirt or an internship right away. So that's something. Certainly students should know how to sew on a button if something pops off. Students should know how to read schedules and book their travel. If that's something that you've done for them, this is the time to turn it over. Simple meal prep, cooking, basting, toasting, microwaving, and knife skills. Why, if my student is required to be on the meal plan? Well, because all of the residence halls have kitchens, and it's a really great idea to send your kid to college with some simple recipes that they can cook from home. They will have a kitchen, access to a kitchen. It will not be, a fantastic kitchen, but it'll have the basics, and family meals and residence hall meals are great. So it's a wonderful way for them to really take a sense of home with them. They should know how to care for and clean their living spaces. Nobody's doing that for them. How often do you take out your trash? How often do you change your sheets? How often do you clean your space? What is the difference between a window cleaner and a surface cleaner? Do you know how to use a vacuum or a broom, etc.? They should know how your family is paying for college. And of course, every family is different. They should know the cost of college and the financial aid package they have and any scholarships. All first-year students should have memorized their social security number. They're a domestic student, and what information to keep confidential, right? And not to keep written down in their phone, but in fact to memorize. Your students should understand the basics of health insurance. What is a copay? How to fill prescriptions, things like that. They should know how to treat common illnesses and manage their own medication dosages. The last thing you want when you have 101.4 fever is to be wandering aimlessly around the aisles of CVS trying to figure out what you should be taking. All students should know how to record and keep a budget if that's not something they're already doing. And they should know how to write a professional email and leave a professional voicemail. That's a big list. There's a lot on there. I think you'll be surprised that your students probably know a lot of these already, or at least parts of a lot of these, but this is a list you can share with your student and go through it line by line. With your student, explore ways for them to be connected on campus and kind of help them tease out those differences between high school and college. So number one is after they arrive on campus, there will be a campus activities fair, and it can be overwhelming, especially to students who have social anxiety. But I would encourage you absolutely to tell your teen not to wait until the campus activities fair to learn about clubs and organizations on campus. They can find that all online through the student activities website. And it's a great idea, even if they're very interested in something, maybe they want to write for the school newspaper or they want to join a band, is to actually reach out to the student leader in charge, send them a message or an email, introduce themselves. And then when they find them at the student activities fair, they will have already made a connection. A lot of students find that they're overwhelmed. The campus activities fair is pretty large. And for students who really haven't done any research at all and are learning about clubs and organizations, on the quad for the first time, it can really feel overwhelming. So the earlier, the better. I would say with your teen, begin checking out some of those important campus resources that your child is going to want or that your child is going to need. So if your student will need or might need counseling, definitely learn about the counseling center at AU. If they need a referral to an off-campus therapist in the area, the Counseling Center webpage is the best place to start. They have great referrals to off-campus therapists. Like same thing, if you are going to need regular medical care, Health Center is a great place to start. They can also give you referrals if you're not familiar with medical professionals in the DC area. Health Center is a great place for those referrals. The Career Center is also a wonderful place to at least start looking online. It can be overwhelming to first year students, and they don't actually need to know more in their first semester than where it is and what the Career Center does. But even that second semester of freshman year, a lot of students are diving into internships or planning for the year ahead, or certainly for summer jobs after their first year. The Career Center is a good place to start. If they're interested in a religious community or spiritual support, there are ample resources at AU, and they should certainly be able to find that online. Academic help, there is tutoring, there is advising, there is faculty support, there's a writing center at AU. There's so much academic help available, and the earlier the better to start researching all of those resources online. Disability and learning support, if you have accessibility needs or your student has accessibility needs, definitely want to start that before they show up on campus. So this is something I never do, which is put this much text on one slide. It's actually something I always told my students when I was teaching, I told my students never to do, but I did want to get this out here since we're all parents. And I wanted to show you, this is actually a page from my book. And it talks about some of the major differences between high school and college that families, especially first-time parents, college parents, are not usually aware of. So in high school, school began and ended at about the same time each weekday. Most high school students in the United States are in class for approximately 35 hours a week and up to 7 different subject areas. And in college, it's very different. Classes are likely going to be, you're going to have fewer classes per week. You're going to have 12 to 15 hours of class time, and you're not going to have as many as 7 subject areas. The typical student at AU is about 5, sometimes 4 subject areas, depending on if you have a lab or not. But students are going to find that they have more free time than they've ever had in their life, and of course, more is required of them in terms of reading and studying. In terms of professionalism and personal responsibility, in high school, parents legally were able to contact teachers or counselors or vice versa. It didn't matter if it was public school or private school. That is not the case in college. Students are responsible for all those communications with faculty and staff, and the parent is cut out of that. In high school, teachers often send reminders of work due. I know my son, who is a very successful college student right now, could never have gotten through some of his high school classes if he did not rely on his high school teacher saying, don't forget, you've got this test, don't forget, you've got this due. That doesn't happen in college. Professors are expecting students to be responsible for their work due. They hand out a syllabus, and the student is responsible for recording when all of those things are due. In high school, you may have heard your students say, I did lousy on this test or quiz, but it's okay. I've got 7 more assignments this marking period. And that is in fact the case in high school, but not so much in college. And in college, student is going to have less frequent feedback. They're going to have fewer actual grades. So each grade is weighted more heavily. And for them to really understand their academic progress, you should be talking to their professors and TAs in office hours. And preparation for class is also a big difference between high school and college. In high school, if your student is doing a reading that was assigned to them one evening, and they know they have the class the next day, because in high school, most classes do meet more readily than they do in college, the student might think, this is really confusing, but it's okay because I know my teacher will explain it tomorrow in class. That doesn't necessarily happen in college, and that's a really important thing for you and your student to recognize, that professors have limited time. There's only 14 weeks of a semester, and if that class meets twice a week, then that faculty member is only meeting with your student 28 times, and that includes their the first day of class when they're going over the syllabus. So in that limited time, faculty are not going to spend a tremendous amount of that class time re-explaining what they assume the student is going to learn on their own. That doesn't mean your student's not going to have questions. What it does mean, though, is that your student is going to need to figure out what they don't understand before they get to class the next day. So that might mean reaching out to the professor or TA, calling a classmate, or really digging down and trying to find some extra help. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to talk about is how important it is to shift some language right now in these last few weeks you've got as the student, as the problem-solving lead. And it's really important because as parents, we have been a problem-solving lead in our kids' lives. And it's time for, if you haven't already done so, to kind of pass the baton onto the student. And this is a time to start really begin discussing some college wellness scenarios, other scenarios. I'm going to give you a few examples and some upcoming decisions that your student's going to need. So you may have seen the pain scale. It's very common if you go to an emergency room. How bad is your arm feeling? Is it, are you at a 3 or are you at an 8? But it's really interesting to note that some mental health professionals on college campuses are now using a similar pain scale in what's called the stress-distress continuum. So if you think about it, stress is on one end of a continuum and distress is on the other end of the continuum. Stress is a normative feeling. Every college student should feel some little bit of stress on a daily basis. That's what it means to be a college student. They feel absolutely no stress, they're probably not doing it right. There should be a low level of stress kind of all of the time. So the idea that 0 is a no, there's nobody really in a no stress situation in terms of mental health in college. But distress is when a student kind of can't really handle that by themselves, and they do need to seek professional help. And so what I like to encourage the families I work with to kind of have a conversation in advance, because every family is different, every teen is different, and figure out where your teen's brain and their problem-solving abilities, where do they turn from a 0 to a 10? Is it at a 3 when their stress goes to distress, or do they reach an 8 before their stress goes to distress? And instead of waiting until your student calls you with heightened emotions from college, very upset, very angry, whatever those emotions might be, instead of trying to narrate the words at that time, which is difficult if a student has heightened emotions, this is the worst day, I hate it here, I want to transfer. You're going to hear you might hear some of those very heavy feelings. But if you can actually dive down and get a number, are you at a 3? Are you at an 8? And wherever that student, your students, kind of move from stress to distress is, kind of listen for that number, because it's much easier to talk in numbers than to talk in words when your student is stressed. Just some little bit of advice there. And then one of the things I do in my Talking College card deck is I give a lot of these what would you do scenarios. So here are just a few that you can start with your student. This is for a parent to say to a student, are you able to narrate your personal health history to a medical provider? So if you break your arm or you break your ankle in college and you're at an emergency room down the street from AU and you are given the clipboard with a whole lot of papers, student, are you able to narrate your past personal health history? Do you know your allergies? Do you know your past surgeries? Do you know your disabilities, etc.? Can you talk about all your medications, what kind of dosages you take, why you take them, etc.? How would you care for a friend who has passed out from alcohol use? Well, a lot of the families I work with say, my child does not drink at all. And that's fantastic. And we're seeing numbers of students who are not engaging with alcohol at all in college. But we don't know if their roommate or their friend is going to engage. So what would you do in this scenario? And this, if you don't know the answer to this is the time to do some research with your family. How might you approach a situation where a new college friend can't afford things you can afford, or when you can't afford things others can? And that's something that happens in a diverse economic environment. Most high school students come from homogeneous socioeconomic environments. Not all, but most do. And AU is a very diverse economic environment. So what is going to happen if this is a student who's with a group of friends and all of those friends are going to go out for pizza or sushi, and that student says, I can't get food off the meal plan. This is how I'm budgeting. How is your student going to handle that language, talking across difference? Really important conversations. If you ever took an adolescent psychology class, you are familiar with reflective listening. And I can't encourage you enough in these final weeks before your student heads off to practice reflexive listening as much as possible. So number one, it's a time for heightened emotions. There's a little anxiety, maybe low-lying anger or anxiety, just heightened emotions, because there's a huge transition from high school to college or home to college. And so if you're noticing this with your student, I would strongly encourage you to use similar language to, I hear that you're really angry, you're really upset. Do you want to just vent? Or do you want to actually help me? Do you want me to help you problem solve? I think this is a problem that parents, we face because we jump in so quickly to help problem solve. We've been doing it since our kids were babies. We do it really, really well. And most of the time, do it better than our 18-year-olds. But this is not a time for us to be problem solving for our students. This is a time for them to be learning problem solving skills. And so this might actually surprise your student the first time you say it, because they might assume you're going to jump into problem solving mode. But this is a way to talk to a young adult. Do you want to vent? Or do you want me to help you problem solve? And a lot of the time the student might say, I don't actually want you to help me problem solve. I just want to kind of talk about it. Trying to use I rather than you messages is a great idea. Probably some of you have done this already. If you haven't, it's a great place to start before your student heads off. I'm going to just give you an example. The student wants to borrow the family car, and you say, absolutely, you're going to go to this party. I just need you to text me when you arrive. And the student says, of course, and they head off to this party, and you never get the text. As a parent, do you immediately text or call and start with, you said you were going to text when you arrive? And many of us do that. That doesn't go over as well as taking the blame in this situation and using I messages. I get really nervous when I'm expecting you to text and you don't. The student will be on the defensive, usually less than you messages. And it's something to play with your language as you're learning to deal with your student as a young adult, using I messages rather than you messages. We're trying to avoid our student being on the defensive. And then another thing I'd love to talk about, and we're almost out of time, is redefining what adulting means. So this is a really interesting concept. There's some really good literature out there on this. So if you sit down, as I have, with a bunch of college-bound students in focus groups, and you say, tell me what adulting means, you're going to get a couple of different answers. Many of them say it means going it alone or doing it by myself, not relying on others. Other students say, I have no idea. It's completely foreign to me. It's a mystery. But the majority say it means going it alone or not relying on others. However, if you sit down with a bunch of adults in focus groups, adults meaning 40 years plus, and you say, what does it mean to be an adult, or what does adulting mean? You're going to actually hear something very different. It means using our resources. When I don't know something, it means asking experts, even if that's Googling something, calling a friend, calling an expert, reaching out to people for help. We know we do this if we have an emergency in our family or a death in our family. We ask our family and our friends to step in and help us, and we own our mistakes. And I think as an educator, I think we've done a real disservice to our teens in our society, not explaining to them that adulting actually doesn't mean going it alone. It means learning to find your resources. And AU's got so many wonderful resources. So here's what I would end with, is encourage your teens to kind of reframe their language if they have a problem from, hey, mom, or hey, dad, what should I do, to, I thought I have a plan, and here's my plan. What do you think? And if you do get the, here's a problem, what should I do? You can actually throw it back to your student and you can say, why don't you think it out and come to me when you have a plan and we can talk about it. It really will encourage some of those problem solving techniques for your student to kick in. So what about now? Number one, tease out your child's specific needs for growth. If you think back to that first slide, where is your student lacking? Is it emotional intelligence? Is there social interaction? Is it their academic or study skills? They certainly aren't lacking in everything, but what kind of things can you help them work on in the time they have left? Think about ways young adults can step up and parents can step back in your particular family, especially in terms of problem solving. Remember that roles for high school parents and roles for college parents are really, really different. Nobody gave us the guidebook on it, and we have to kind of limp through it ourselves. And finally, understanding that growing up is not the same as being a grown-up. We shouldn't expect our 18-year-olds to know as much about the world as we know. And colleges do expect messy first-year students. So if you feel that your student is kind of unfinished around the edges, that's completely appropriate, developmentally appropriate, and AU will welcome them with open arms. So final slide, help your teens help themselves and take the central role as they prepare for their transition to college. So I'm going to end with this. If you are interested in some more information, I do lots of talks, I do lots of free giveaways, and tell you about other colleagues who do wonderful free things out in the world. Certainly follow me on social media. That QR code will take you to my website if you're interested. If you're not one of the first 100 who got the Talking College card deck and you're interested in the Talking College card deck, that will give you a little information. And I think we ended just on time. Happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Let's give her all a virtual round of applause.
Thank you.
Yes, yay. So I want to get to our Q&A section. You are welcome to add anything into the Q&A box if you've got a question. I do want to start with some questions that our family submitted as a part of their registration. So we did have a couple of families just kind of ask in general, who is going to check in on my student? Andrea, I know you spoke a lot about the shift from, high school parents to college parents. Do you want to add anything?
I would say the greatest thing you can do is to learn about the resources at AU and make sure your student knows about the resources. And so when you get the call that says my heat's not working or there's a bug in my room, you're not the one who's calling Residence Life, that your student knows exactly who they need to reach out to. And you take that step back, you can encourage them to use all those campus resources and their RAs, the orientation leaders, peer leaders in their first year classes. Those are great places to start.
Yes, I'll also share that students have access to an online self-orientation through their Canvas platform. And so students have been notified about this, but that's a great site to learn a little bit more about all of the resources that AU offers and help familiarize themselves with AU. I do see a hand raise. I'm going to grab it. I'll also share just a couple of notes. I know it can be daunting for students, at least in those first few weeks, to reach out to resources. So I will say, if they don't know where to go or who to ask, as Andrea has mentioned, I think RAs are a great place to start. Orientation leaders are a great place to start. They could also reach out to their first year advisor, their AUX instructor. So there are a lot of folks who are positioned to help as long as your student reaches out. Let's see. I saw a hand and let me see if I can find it again. We also got a few questions about, will the session be recorded? And it will be recorded. And so we will share that out with you just as soon as it's available. So we do have a question in the chat about the FERPA waiver. And so this parent is asking, do you recommend the FERPA waiver? How many parents usually obtain such a waiver? So I'll just start with that first part.
I would not offer any recommendations. I think that is a familial discussion. I know that some families say, we're going to start with the FERPA waiver, and if we feel that things are going well, we can revisit that in the second year, even in the second semester. I have other families that say we're going to assume things are going to go swimmingly, and if not, we can revisit this. But I do think that's a discussion that you need to have in the family with lots of, lots of thoughts. I think the students should certainly be a part of it as well. There are ways. I know I work with a lot of families that don't have their students sign the FERPA waiver, do not have access, but they do require things. I know that in my own family, my kids who have been through college, we did not have them sign the FERPA waiver, but we did require that we saw their end of their semester grades. That was a requirement because we were paying for a good amount of their college. So there's lots of gray areas. I don't think it's an either or, but I think being more as knowledgeable about it as possible and making sure you understand what that means, what you will have or not have access to if the FERPA waiver is not signed.
Thank you. We had a question about what are some of the more common roommate conflicts that occur in that first year?
You want me to answer that, or you want to turn it to the orientation leaders, or I'm happy to.
Yeah, anybody who wants to answer, I think would be great.
I'd love to hear from the students. Yeah.
I was gonna say that not that this is a problem, but I think I came into AU thinking that my roommate was gonna be like my best friend in the universe. And it's okay if your roommate is not your best friend. I think sometimes conflicts can start when you have those expectations of like doing everything together with your roommate and things like that, which are nice, but also maybe your roommate just, you guys don't connect on like a friendly level, but you guys are good roommates. Things like cleanliness or like schedules, and especially sleep schedules, come up and can be conflicts. But you could also always go to your RA. Your student can always go to the RA to help settle roommate disputes. But just knowing that small issues will always come up no matter who you room with. It's just all about adjusting and then using resources like your RA if anything really serious or problematic comes up.
Yeah, and I just want to add that you will likely have some sort of issue come up with some friend group. And when it happened to me, I thought it was going to be the end of the world. So of course I panicked and I called my parents and I was flustered and I did all of that. You know, I called them saying, you know, I don't know what to do. I can't do this anymore. My life is ruined, all that. So just know that likely the friends of your student, your first week friends, as I call it, are first week friends. You know, these are likely not friends that will be sticking around for the long haul, that you will be inviting to your student's wedding, none of that. You know, just make sure to, one, advise your student that when a situation like this happens, take a break and go and like take a walk, go seek campus resources, something like that, because college is very much like a bubble. It can become very much like a bubble. And if you don't interact with things outside of college, it can feel more like a walled garden than this, you know, great expanse of thought and things like that. So it's just, you know, it's very important.
I would say that's both Claire and Nolan offered awesome advice. I actually have a whole chapter in my book about how you should be best roommates, not best friends with your roommate. And I think in many situations, it's even better not to be best friends with your roommate, as Claire was saying, you know, as long as you have mutual respect for your possessions, the time, the lights, the music, you know, all of those kind of things. Cleanliness is obviously a big one. And I know that AU works with a roommate contract unless something's changed. I think AU still, yes. Okay, so AU still uses a roommate contract. So the students are not going at it alone. There are RAs to help them, and they will be signing, and kind of it's a living document that they'll be signing with their roommate or roommates. And as they mature and they learn a little bit more about living with someone and living with this particular person, they'll be able to, you know, say, you've got too many friends coming over late at night and we need to revisit this roommate contract. So it is very similar to a lease in some ways, and it is a living document, and I think it's going to really, really help. So going back to the original question, I think the students completely nailed it. And, you know, the more you can expect, the better. And you can kind of tease out, what are you going to do? Are you going to call mom, or are you going to call dad when you have your first fight with your roommate? Or are you going to try to handle it on your own, knowing that ideally the roommate's the first person to talk to, and then the RA would be the second person.
Great. Thank you all. So we have a question about faculty and grades. Does AU require faculty to report midterm grades or progress reports to freshmen and sophomore students, or in lower division courses or something of that sort, something like a midterm academic check? And I don't know if you want to speak on your experience as a former sociology professor. I'm happy to share my thoughts as a former AUX instructor as well.
Camille, I'd let you take it since you're currently working at AU.
Gotcha. So there is no requirement to report midterm grades or progress. I think this speaks to the self-advocacy piece that we've been talking about tonight. It's really a good idea for students to get in the habit of reaching out to their professors to see where they are as far as grades, all of those things. And so it's great to utilize those office hours to do that. If your student is using like a Canvas platform as a part of their class, there are grades posted to that site that they can check. But it's really just a good rule of thumb to check in with the TA, check in with the professor. I know for me personally, I was a former AUX instructor and I did provide a midterm progress report just so students had a good idea of where they were before we headed into midterms. Yes, Nolan, I will come to you. One thing I do want to note is that usually around the first 6 weeks of the semester, faculty are encouraged to fill out what's called an academic alert. And so an academic alert is something that a professor might send if your student isn't attending classes, or maybe they aren't performing too well in the class. A student will receive an academic alert that basically just tells the student that the faculty member is concerned about them. There's also a link to academic coaching resources as well. So they do get tools to kind of rebound and build up their grade if necessary. So while that is encouraged, in the first 6 weeks, an academic alert can be submitted at any point in the semester. So I want to make a note of that as well. And then I'm going to toss it to Nolan.
Yeah, I want to go back to a point that Camille made talking about Canvas. Now, Canvas is very important. As an orientation leader, all of your students are in a Canvas section right now. And it is important for your student to understand how to use Canvas, because it's not like Canvas goes away. Canvas is how every single class, where you get your assignments, where you have the syllabus, all of that. If your student does not know how to use Canvas, it is important to walk through with your student how to use Canvas, because you can get in a whole heap of trouble if you don't properly know how to use it. Because sometimes students will miss an assignment because they don't know where to find it on Canvas, or they don't know where the syllabus is posted and all of that. And what will happen is that most likely your student will call you in a whole heap of panic. And I don't know how many of you parents are familiar with Canvas, but I'm guessing not a lot. So it's important that your student figures that out now. And adding on to that, your student is in an orientation group. It is important for your student to know this right now, because it's important that your student gets oriented, that your student has goes through these Canvas modules talking about all sorts of things about financial aid, about different things to do on campus, about all of this. It's important that that happens right now, because if your student is not attending that, we can see it, and it's important for you to do that. So I just want to add that as a public service announcement. So to add on to Camille's point,
Great, thank you so much. So I'm just scanning here to see if we have any additional questions that are popping up. I do see one that I'm currently answering. Can students set up weekly academic coaching? Yes, they can. I do want to put that link in the chat for you all. Post it right here. But academic coaching is a great resource. I actually encourage students to sign up for it early, before the need is there, so that they can actually get in the habit of working with somebody and learning more about how they study best as they develop those skills. So feel free to sign up for that. And then I think that is all the questions that we have. I do want to post our website in the chat for you all. So this is our page for parents and families. We have a lot of great resources here. This was the first of what will be our webinar series for the academic year. So we will have webinars throughout the fall and the spring that work with families on the best way to support your student through a variety of transitions. So we will welcome campus partners who will also speak about that as well. And so yeah, we'll make sure to post those on our website, dates coming soon, but you can get an idea of what our lineup will be, yeah, for the next year. And with that, I think that is all we have for tonight. So I really appreciate you all coming out tonight. Thank you again to Dr. Brenner. Thank you so much to our orientation leaders. I really appreciate you sharing your experiences and perspectives. I think that's been very helpful for families tonight. And with that, have a good rest of your night. Again, this will be recorded. We'll send it out to you just as soon as we have it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.